let's get started. Thanks everyone for coming. This is our second inaugural episode of Tales from the Trails, which is just a kind of a casual speaker series about all things trails and possibly vaguely related to the RMC. So I'd like to introduce Jed Talbot, who is the owner of Off the Beaten Path OBP Trailworks out of Maine. Does a lot of work in the White Mountains as well as Maine, and has been involved for the past, how long have you been down there, Jed? Five years, 6 years, 7 years?
In a full 5 years, going on 6, I believe.
So the past 6 years, in a couple of ongoing projects, developing sustainable trail systems in 2 main parks in the Patagonia region of Argentina, as well as a couple other smaller related projects. But the 2 main ones were focusing on our Paradoxically National Park and Patagonia National Park. And we'll get more into what those are and where those are as we go. Let's see, if you have questions, if you want to put those in the chat, that might be the smoothest way to do that, or hold them for the end and we'll try to allow a little time. And just a plug for Tales from the Trails, if you have something interesting to talk about related to trails and or the White Mountains, let us know and we'll get you on here. Jed, anything else for the intro you'd like to have known?
No, thanks, Dave. I appreciate it, and you know, thanks for offering up the opportunity to discuss what we've been doing down there. Just as a note, this presentation, although it'd be great to say Dave and I crafted it specifically for the Tales from the Trails, it was actually something that another person who's been involved with a lot of the projects down there. You'll see his name on the screen right here, Willie Bittner, for Great Lakes Trail Builders, and a good friend of mine. We put this together for the Sustainable Trails Conference, which is basically a big trails conference that happened in Bentonville, Arkansas in March. So this is basically the same presentation we gave down there. Willie and I and Dave and I have retrofitted it just a little bit, but that's basically where this has come from. But yeah, I'm ready to go if you are, Dave.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. You introduced me. Am I supposed to introduce you now? Because you didn't introduce yourself.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, so I've worked, let's see, I'm going on 13 seasons or so building and maintaining trails, the past 4 with Jed and OBP, and I've worked on one of the 2 projects we're going to talk about, Patagonia National Park, for the past 3 winters. Yeah.
There it is. Great. Well, we'll launch right into it, and this is pretty informal. So feel free to jump into the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and jump in if you want immediate clarification on anything, please do. So the broad brushstrokes of what we've been doing down there in Patagonia, as Davis said, I've been going down there for about 6 years. I've gone down there, I think 8 or 9 times at this point. I was trying to calculate it. I think I've hiked, most of it being bushwhacking, about 2,500, a little over 2,500 miles down there in Patagonia, trying to scout out trails for some pretty awesome trail systems. So it's basically like, I've got like a bushwhacking through hike down in Patagonia at this point, and I hope it doesn't stop ever. But we've had 3 design and construction projects, and we'll be talking about the ones in Paradoxically National Park, as well as Patagonia Park. There's another one in Valle Chacabuco, which is farther north in Patagonia, outside Bariloche, which is sort of one of the mountaineering meccas of Patagonia. Dave is going to talk a little bit more about the region in a little bit. But out of those projects, we also had a couple other design projects as well that have been going on down there. In the Peninsula Quechua and at 14 Chacabuco. which we're not going to get into that stuff, but that's basically, I hope in another 5 years, we'll be giving presentations on amazing stuff that's happened in these other regions. So suffice to say, there's stuff going on all over the place down in Patagonia right now, funded by organizations that are generally based in the US. So far, we've been able to, on these projects that we're talking about, these two major projects we're talking about, we've trained over 150 Patagonians. Apologize for the misspelling there, and paid them to learn how to build trails sustainably, which is pretty great. We've had over 25 US folks come down, including 3 member companies from the Professional Trail Builders Association. We've designed over 120 miles of trail. At this point, we've built over 80 miles of trail by hand on the last 6 seasons. Built 7 campgrounds, rustic, small backcountry campgrounds, 10 backcountry huts we'll see some photos of, 20 latrines, many more to boot. We're in the process of building 17 more. I was just going over the designs of those actually this morning with some folks in Patagonia. And renovated or built 6 buildings for public use or staff use or administrative use as the trails and infrastructure development is happening. And then another probably dozen structures or so were built temporarily for trail building staff. We'll see pictures of those a little later. They're basically like these geodesic domes that we put up temporarily to house folks as the work is happening, and then decommission them. 2 extensive local youth trail programs have been developed in the major areas, and there's actually probably 3 more in the works around the Bariloche region, which is farther north of the areas that we'll be talking about here. A lot of fence and stock removal, and it's hard to overestimate the effect that something that the removal and addition of fences systematically and thoughtfully in light of sort of conservation-minded efforts, the impact is really powerful. So bottom line, Patagonia had stock animals running over it for generations. It used to be sheep, and now it used to be almost primarily sheep, and now it's primarily cattle with some sheep. And now fences are being removed to allow native animals to be able to migrate fluidly, but keep stock animals out of certain sensitive areas. So many miles or kilometers of fence has been removed and added as part of these major initiatives. We've only been peripherally involved with that stuff, as well as peripherally involved with the rewilding efforts of native flora and fauna that are going on. So the same funding sources that are allowing Deva and I to go down there and do some really cool stuff on the trails is also allowing for some bigger picture things to happen in terms of native flora and fauna. So we'll touch on that very briefly, but it's definitely not really what we're going down there to do. So we probably won't focus on it so much, but it's really important stuff that's happening. So just a little bit about the main folks that are down there working on these projects, the key players, if you will. There's a picture of Perito Moreno National Park. That's where we started working. This is all originally envisioned by the Tompkins Foundation. Christine and Doug Tompkins originally went down there in the late 80s, early 90s, actually bought a piece of land that was to the northwest of Perito Moreno National Park, which is I think it's the first national park in Argentina, but it's still considered by far the most remote, the hardest to get to with the least amount of infrastructure. And they added on to the national park. They donated it, their land that they purchased, back to the National Park Administration of Argentina. But where we are located right now, we're in Argentina, but these mountains you're seeing in the background, those are the border of Argentina and Chile, just to give you a frame of reference. And Tompkins Foundation really started off envisioning what we could do if some of the funds that could be funneled to the basically broke National Park Administration in Argentina to help build some of these areas up. So the Butler Conservation Fund came in. Christine Tompkins is a board member of the Butler Conservation Fund, a New York-based philanthropic organization. And they came in and they started basically paying to have some huts built and have some local folks start to build the trails a little bit more sustainably than they currently existed in the park. Those efforts were challenging because nobody really knew how to build trails sustainably down in Patagonia. So I got a call from Butler Conservation Fund and they asked, it's pretty much like, can you go down to Patagonia? Here's the broad, like, this is what's happening to the project. It's falling apart. Can you be down there in 2 weeks to help train these guys how to actually build trails? And I was like, I'll be there in 3 weeks. And they're like, sure. So I went down there and met some really great people who have all of these backcountry skills and are very strong, but just didn't know how to build trails sustainably. So I basically put on a 3-week, wilderness work skills, if you will, to get these guys trained up on how to build trails. And they took to it extremely readily. And the season finished out pretty well. And building on that small success, Butler hired a local company, Bunker Construction, that was basically these two very, very wonderful guys from Bariloche. So Bariloche is a town, a bit north, about 12 hours north of this project, but sort of the mecca of mountaineering. As I've said, these guys are mountaineering guides and they know all the mountaineering guides in the area, but they also in the off season have they build houses and do various construction projects. So they brought them down and they connected with all their mountain guide buddies, who are basically perfect trail builders in training, and said, let's go down here and learn how to build trails. We worked with the National Park Administration of Argentina, as well as the park itself, Prieto Moreno. And then in order to make all of this work financially, because the money was coming from the United States, we enlisted Banco de Bosques, which is a wonderful nonprofit based out of Buenos Aires, Argentina, that do a lot of wonderful, land and conservation initiatives. And basically the money went to them and then they went through and were able to pay local folks and people in Argentina to help get this project done. Different local contractors as well as US contractors who I worked to source came down there. So it was basically like a perfect storm of people coming down to build a lot of trail in like 2 seasons. We built over 60 kilometers of trail, hand built in about 7 months total. So that was very, very fast-paced project that's continuing, and we'll talk about that. But we're also going to use the other project that Deva is about to talk about to sort of reflect how things could be done, maybe not in such a hurried manner.
Yeah, so the Patagonia Park, which is, again, about an hour and a half north of Prieto Moreno Park, was a project that, Jed, I believe you started in 2019, 2018.
That's correct.
Yeah, so just over 3 years ago. And it also starts with the Tompkins Foundation. And then kind of building on that model, brought in some other partners, including Rewilding Argentina, which is a national organization that works to preserve local flora and fauna. So the Freya Foundation is a newer conservation-minded nonprofit that sought kind of to help and replicate the model of the Tompkins Foundation in terms of purchasing land and funding the infrastructure for the park. And then who else do we have? We have OBP Trail Works, obviously, as well as Great Lakes Trail Builder, that's Willie Bittner out of Wisconsin. And then basically the model here was to do everything that was done in the other park, but over a bit longer period of time. So to slow things down and try to learn from certain, learn to do better in certain ways. So our model in this park was to send US trail professionals and try to work with small groups of local team members who didn't necessarily have trail work experience, and then to build a local organization that could continue that maintenance and continue that building after we left and during the times when we're not there, because we're only there in the winter. This project is also very important because it heavily involves National Administration of Archaeology and the local province, because Patagonia Park contains the Cave of the Hands, which is a UNESCO heritage site, which we'll have a couple pictures of later, but it's a very, very important site with thousands of cave paintings, one of the most important sites in the world, and it's right where we're working. So that's definitely another player in this picture, is how do we interface with an organization that's already trying to protect a very small area within this bigger territory.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more in detail about the differences between these two projects in terms of approach. But the fact that Cave of the Hands has such close proximity, it's integrated into the trail system that's being constructed around, is a huge difference between this project and the other project. And just a note, we're dealing with the National Administration of Archaeology for trail design, layout, what can go where, how to deal with artifacts that we were finding all literally littering the ground all over the place. But the Santa Cruz, which is the province that Patagonia, the future Patagonia National Park and Torres Canyon is located in, it's a provincial park. So the provincial park actually has jurisdiction over the Cave of the Hands, even though this nonprofit has come in and conserved all of this other land around it. So there's also definitely an interplay between the provincial parks and the nonprofits that have sort of protected the area all around them, because the provincial parks are doing everything they can with the funds and the means they have, but they have really like minuscule budgets.
Yeah, so we should talk about where these projects are. And I wanted to give a little bit of an intro to what exactly is Patagonia, because I think it's a word we hear a lot without really knowing what it describes. And Patagonia is basically encompasses an area about 2 times California, if you can imagine that, in the southern end of Argentina and Chile. Roughly 300 to 400 square miles. So one of the things Jed kind of touched on was, you know, we all have kind of these, we might have words that come to mind when we think of Patagonia, which is this wild, remote, extreme area. And in one ways, it is very wild and remote and extreme. On the other hand, it's been used for farming for many, many years. So the main economies have been sheep farming and oil, which are both relatively extractionist and don't put a lot back into the land. I mean, as Jed mentioned, sheep have absolutely devastated this landscape. So introducing, introducing a new economy, that being tourism, with the goal of kind of developing and diversifying the local economies is a really big part of both of these projects, as well as protecting the land and conserving it. The land itself that we're mostly dealing with, you saw some pictures of mountains in Patagonia Park. The territory in Pinturas is mostly high and dry grassland or steppe. So we're dealing with kind of a plateau, and then you have canyons that split that plateau and kind of provide these micro environments. So that's kind of a basic overview. Jed, do you want to add anything to?
Sure. I mean, yeah, it's funny that Patagonia is, considered one of these like iconic areas to go to explore the mountains and hike and have your adventures, but it's largely being done on trailless and unsustainably constructed or non-constructed trails. And so the idea of sustainable trail construction is pretty much a foreign concept there, which is one of the wonderful things about these projects, that we've been able to bring more attention to that than there has been in the past. So just to put it in perspective on where these two projects are, the arrows are pointing to Perito Moreno National Park, and those two arrows are pointing to the future Patagonia National Park that we're working with, which Dave was referring to as Pinturas Canyon, because that's probably the most specific way to do it, or near where the Cave of the Hands is. Patagonia National Park is being thrown around there. It's easy to see headlines and come across it on certain social media feeds if you're tapped into that, of Patagonia National Park. And that can be in Chile, it can be in Argentina, it could be one of like at least a dozen locations right now. The idea is to take a bunch of areas of land that have been conserved and continue to establish connectivity between Argentina and Chile, and really create habitat corridors and conserved corridors of land. It's a process, and so when you hear Patagonia National Park, it might be current national park that's been given over to either Argentina or to Chile, or it could be proposed future national park, like where we've been working. So know that Patagonia National Park, that term can mean a bunch of different things. Similarly, I just feel like we need to define Perito Moreno, because that's also a little bit confusing, because if you we're talking about Perito Moreno National Park, which is this park that's right here, right there, which is a very remote national park. But when most people hear the term Perito Moreno, they think of this glacier right here that's outside the town of Calafate, which is Perito Moreno Glacier, and that's where a lot of tourists go to visit. And Perito Moreno himself was an amazing individual in Argentinian history. He was a photographer, helped start a zoological societies and did a bunch of amazing stuff. But more or less, his legacy is defining the border between Argentina and Chile. I kind of screwed up the border right there, but that's what it does. And so he's done a lot of stuff. So Perito Moreno is a highly revered figure in Argentinian history for a good reason. So he's also a guy, but then also when you look at our project here, that Dave and I have been down to the last couple of seasons, the closest town right there, and that's the town of Perito Moreno. So you hear the terms Perito Moreno being thrown around a lot. It's a person, it's a town, it's a glacier, and it's a national park. So apologize in advance for the confusion there. But whenever we say Perito Moreno Park, we're referring to this region right there. So both of these big projects, and we're looking at the Pinturas Canyon right now. That's Rio Pinturas, that's the Pinturas River. And this is where Deva has probably spent about 3 months or more, 4 months of her life living down in that lush green valley at the bottom of that canyon. So these two projects share very similar goals. The way that they have been seeking to implement those goals are significantly different. So we're going to highlight the similarities in goals and also the differences in implementation in the next number of slides. So what are we trying to do down there, really? The goal is to construct a world-class hiking trail system and the associated infrastructure that goes with it, right? So that would be the human waste management piece, right? Where are people getting their, where are people staying, where are people camping, what are they eating, how are they getting their stuff, if they blow a tire, how do they get a new tire, that sort of stuff. So like, how do people hike this area, but how do people come in safely, enjoy this area and leave because it's extremely remote. And we want to create educational opportunities for the public. That includes how to understand the sustainability of trails and how to build sustainable trails. And also a lot of youth education and immersion in nature. So we'll talk about the school programs a little later. I'm going to bolster concepts of sustainable trail design in Patagonia and beyond. So the folks funding all of these initiatives, they're using these areas as a jumping off or as a platform, if you will, to bolster concepts of sustainable trail design by bringing in a lot of people across Chile and Argentina to learn what's going on here and take it back to their regions. And then ideally to leave an economically stable, self-sustaining system in place, and to add to that, one that also is adding a different revenue source to the local communities, other than, as Dave was mentioning, sort of the more extractive industries of ranching. The way ranching is done there, I should say. So there's 4 main tenets that help sort of achieve those goals that are common between both of the projects that have been happening down there. The primary one's infrastructure development. We're building trails, we're building huts, we're building places for people to go to the bathroom, and the roads that bring them there and the roads that bring them back home. Conducting a whole bunch of education. So that's educating local folks how to build trails. That's educating kids how amazing this area is that they live adjacent to, that they've probably never visited. That's educating the National Park Service staff and the Provincial Park Service staff about the resources that they have available to them. It's the physical sustainability piece. How do you build trails that don't go straight up fall line and erode like crazy? Where any of us who build trails in the White Mountains are intimately familiar with that dilemma. And the social and economic sustainability. So we're doing this for the long term. You know, our goal is not to go back to Patagonia every winter, even though it's awesome and it's really fun and I love being there. The goal is to create a system where the folks in charge are the folks who live there, and it's tourism money that comes in and sustains the systems that are already in place. That's the goal. Easier said than done. So I'll go sort of point for point, and feel free to jump in, Deva. I'll go point for point through those 4 main tenets and how they're similar and different between the 2 major projects we've been working on down there. The infrastructure development piece, we're building camping, and that basically happened because we started building a whole bunch of trails, and the benefactor came down from the States, and he went and he's hiking these trails, and the first 2 days were amazing. He's like, this is amazing, it's awesome. And then he started seeing like these families coming out there and hiking in these remote areas, and they had no place to stay or sleep. And we're in an area where, like this picture we're looking at in this camping area, you're talking probably 6 hours of hiking and 5.5 hours of driving to find a place that would sell a loaf of bread, for instance. So it's pretty remote. So to not offer the opportunity for people to stay overnight was defeating the purpose. So we switched gears and we started really focusing on how do we give people really good remote backcountry camping experiences in these areas, instead of just offering a whole bunch of cool trails and then having them camp wherever they want. So we designed and constructed tent camping in the areas of most intensive use, and this took a lot of my time personally on the design front, because we were trying to locate those in the areas that made the most sense for people visiting, but also understanding that any camping area is going to promote more intensive degradation of a particular area. But we put in a whole bunch of tent pads, so we would show people exactly where to camp, figure out where the tents were going, carrying capacities, things like that, and get people to go exactly where we wanted them to, because everywhere else around was less than optimal to set a tent up. And then we started putting in latrines, and all of these are basically like pit toilets. They're composting latrines, but they're separate the solids and the liquids, so that we get more out of it. Patagonia is an area where things do not break down very readily at all. And so the way that we deal with human waste management in remote areas that are very arid and things don't break down is a little bit different than the way we do them here in the Northeast. But for instance, where Dave and I are working the last 3 years, there's it's a World Heritage, like a UNESCO World Heritage site. There's world-class trails there. How many bathrooms were open for the public as of 2 years ago? I think one in this entire, one bathroom in the entire area.
And it's something, lack of latrines, anywhere, it's something you notice immediately when you travel even a little bit. I haven't traveled a lot, but even traveling just a little bit in Argentina, places where people go to be outside, there's no bathrooms, and anywhere that's slightly hidden, you're going to go and find human waste, and that kind of forethought and planning unfortunately doesn't always happen at the same time that the other infrastructure does. So we're trying to be ahead of the game in this and develop the infrastructure as we go.
No pun intended.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is again, shouldn't be a foreign concept, but like designing and building and installing latrines has been an uphill battle every step of the way. We've also really been working on the access. So these roads are so bad. Like if you look at the rough guide for Perito Moreno National Park or one of these guidebooks, they suggest bringing 2 spare tires and extra fuel cans and all the food you need for a week just to visit the park for a day, because you don't know what's going to happen. It snowed on me, I think, every single week I was there in the middle of the summer at some point. The weather's very unpredictable, and the roads are really bad. So building the roads and building trailheads, going back a little bit, but parking lot improvement, road improvement, trailhead improvement. This is an area that is so ripe. There's so many people that are excited to work and build this stuff, but the finances aren't quite there. That we had the highway crew come in to Perito Moreno National Park and work for weeks rebuilding all the roads. They even went as far as building a new road out of the park to another community. And we basically, all we did was pay their diesel fuel and their food costs, because this road construction crew, they're paid salaried, they're salaried, and that's in the budget, but they didn't have enough money in their budget to run their equipment. So they were literally sitting around all day long, unable to run their dump trucks and their excavators and their graders, because they didn't have money for fuel. And so by basically saying, hey, we'll pay your food, we'll pay your fuel, there was a free highway crew available. They were very excited to work. And then we were able to rebuild all the roads in this national park and connect other communities to the national park. But that's how sort of how sparse the funding is for even just basic road maintenance in Patagonia. Route 40, the main north-south road in Patagonia, still isn't entirely paved at this point. This is a shot. I didn't see if Benzo's on this call, but Benzo Harris of RMC Legacy did the restoration of this parking lot. This is an old parking lot that was placed right in the view shed of where all the trails and huts were being constructed. So part of what we're doing is looking like with a long view of how do we locate our parking lots in our areas. It's a very sort of elementary way of designing some things. The way things happen, you would basically like drive as close as you can to the bottom of the hill if you want to go to the top of the hill, and you get as close as you can and you go straight up, right? And that's the way things have been built. And so we're like, oh no, let's locate the parking areas in ways that we can have a nice, beautiful contour grade trail up to get to where we need to be, and the parking lot's out of view of where we want to go because it's farther away, because we're like not going straight up the hill. There's a lot of these very basic design concepts that we've been incorporating and retrofitting what's already been done down there. And part of that is also the naturalization, transplantation of native bushes and plants that do actually transplant, irrigating them when possible, and restoring some areas. So that was Benzo's work right there. We've also been building huts. So not so many huts on the project where Dave and I are working on, but the previous project, we constructed 10 huts. These are still free at this point for use for the public. There's a reservation system, and you can reserve these huts. You hike into them. They're spread out about 7 to 8.
I think we might have just lost Jed. Well, I can keep going a little bit, although I don't control the slideshow. Looks like Jed just has to leave and come back in. So the huts are one piece of it, which was important in the Perito Moreno because it's so far from any other kind of accommodation. You know, that park was very far from the nearest town. The other park that we're working in, so the Patagonia park, was about 45 minutes from the town. So we were dealing there with many more day trippers who would come, families who would come. So in that park, we were more focused on latrines, concessionaires, which Jed will probably talk about, and then just having short loops, medium loops, longer loops, and a variety of options to deal with them. Does anyone have any specific questions I could take right now as we wait for Jed to get back online?
Was there the layout of the trails, is there much in the way of a linear trail system, or is it kind of more of a web at this point?
So people definitely always want loops when it's possible. And then thinking about all types of users is the other way that we kind of go about trying to design those. So eventually the goal is always kind of a web where you have, multiple options, and you get to all the, the interesting points. So another way you design the system is you pick your control spots, pick the spots where you definitely need to hit. It's a viewpoint, it's a big rock or a big tree or a beautiful place by the river, and that kind of dictates how your trail system evolves. So in Patagonia Park, we're aiming to build like 50 to 80 kilometers, and I think they have, if I'm not mistaken, about 30 kilometers built right now. And basically there's one out and back, one small loop, and one big loop. And that's about it. Anyone else have specific questions to keep me going while we wait for Jed to get back online?
Yeah. Hey, Deva. Me, Duncan.
Yeah.
Great to see you.
Hi, Duncan.
I'm wondering, like, what percentage of the users might be like local people versus tourists from elsewhere in Argentina versus, international backpackers.
That's a good question. So both these parks are right on Route 40, which is the big north-south thoroughfare, basically. And it's road tripping in Argentina is a big thing. So people like pile into these almost clown car vans. You wouldn't believe that how old some of these vans are that people are driving around in. And they'll basically drive like from the north part of the country to the southern tip, to Tierra del Fuego, and just see all the sights on the road. And so both these parks are somewhat off that main thoroughfare. So you do get a fair amount of local, perhaps not local, but you get a fair amount of Argentinian people passing through. In terms of local, that's also kind of interesting, because neither of these communities that are close to these parks are what you would think of as like mountain communities. So the people there don't necessarily aren't like habituated, to go outside and hike or go out and rock climb, or that's just not, there's not a huge like outdoor community there. So the local piece in both these projects, I think they've been very active trying to engage the local community and bring in, for example, like youth groups to spend a night, and developing programs to kind of facilitate that kind of travel. But for the past few years, there hasn't been any international travel at all, of course. It's been, both of these parks have been a little hamstrung in their international outreach because of COVID. So.
Thank you. I don't know. My whole internet just went down completely, so I'm tethering off my phone right now. So the luxuries of living in suburbia. Who knew? All right. Yahoo.
So we had a couple questions, Jed, about visitation.
Yeah, sorry about that. Great.
Yeah, pick up where you left off.
Specifically.
Sure.
Okay. I definitely want to hit the visitation thing, because the Prieto Moreno National Park sees, I think, in the like high double digits of visitation per year. Literally nobody would visit this park. Whereas, you would have that same number of folks going through Patagonia National Park. Well, specifically the Cave of the Hands tour buses that cycle through all the time. You'd see a visitation in 1 hour in Patagonia National Park than what you'd see in a season in Prieto Moreno National Park. Well, we've got more information behind those numbers, so we can talk about it a little later. But the shelters that we built in Prieto Moreno National Park were basically to house like a small army of folks. We had over 100 people working on this job at any given moment, because there were very ambitious outcomes for a short couple seasons of work. And the reason why all of that, we don't need to go into the weeds too deeply about why that is, but suffice to say, it was tied to the right people being in place, from the funding source to the folks on the ground, all the way up to the administrative positions. The vice president of national parks was a good friend of the benefactor, and those are presidentially appointed positions. So if the administration changed, which it did in Argentina, those positions changed. And so the ability to get conservation-based initiatives pushed through at a very accelerated pace had everything to do with the right folks at the high end of the administration in Argentina being on board with what's happening. And that's the reason why the stuff down in Prieto Moreno National Park happened as quickly as it did, because there were basically 2 years before the administration was to change and people's positions changed. So with that in mind, all these temporary shelters were put up so that like hundreds of people could be working on the projects at all times. And like, this is what like one of those little temporary dome villages looked like in the middle of this beautiful national park, where we were basically like I was living in this little dome right there. That's where I lived for like 6 months, and I was doing the trail design, and then these bigger domes were where the trail crew could come back and eat meals together and have, you know, it's full of bunk beds. Another one was full of bunk beds for them to come back and then go out and build the trails. These are now being decommissioned and pulled off the landscape. Whereas, you know, very differently on the project that I've been working on with Deva, things are being much more approached in a manner that allows for a lot more conscious decision making and permanent decision making to be made. So we're taking existing buildings like this one in the slide and having that be permanent housing for folks, not just who are building now, but will be staffing this area for the decades to come, and eventually turning a lot of these buildings over to a national park. So there's a lot of it takes a lot more time. These buildings are taking years to build because it's material sourcing is if you think it's difficult in the States right now, it's very, very challenging in Argentina. So the stuff's taking a lot more time, but it's going to be there for a lot longer. So it's a very different approach to the way that the infrastructure for the staff and the folks building the trails is being looked at. Also developing comprehensive and consistent signage plans, ongoing efforts. But as an example of some of the signage that's being built around the trails, these are all brand new trails that we're seeing in these signs, all brand new signs, showing the profiles of the elevation, what's allowed, what's not allowed. And then training the local team. So I'll touch briefly on the first project. You know, the work is primarily being accomplished by Patagonian workers. It's so awesome that, you know, folks in the States like Deva and Benzo and myself get to go down there, and Greg, who you see in the photo, Deva's fiance, and other folks get to go down there and do this work. But we're really just trying to pass that knowledge along to enough people that will continue it on for the future. So in the first project I worked on in Prieto Moreno National Park, that was generally done by these mountaineers, these big, rough, rugged guys coming out of Bariloche, 12 hours away, coming down there, working for 3 to 6 weeks at a time, and then going back home. And that worked to get a lot of work done really quickly. But we're trying to take a different tact with the Patagonia National Park project because our timeline isn't nearly as crunched. You want to touch on that, Deva?
Yeah, so the teams in Patagonia Park were a lot smaller. We started with 4 people, and I believe we've been as big as 6 or 7 in the past couple years. And then, so that initial team of 4 people, 4 local people, was accompanied by 4 US people. So we were 1-to-1 ratio for learning and teaching and working together and kind of establishing this rapport, which allowed us to, I think, much better control kind of the quality of the work that we were doing with them, and just communicate a lot more frequently about our expectations and what we wanted the final product to look like. In some ways that's been more difficult because we've not having a big team, you don't always have that momentum that kind of pushes you forward and gets stuff done, and we're much more vulnerable to 1 or more people dropping out here and there. But it's been consistently a team of 4 that has worked primarily on trails in the Patagonia Park. And then every winter joined by US team members.
Exactly. And that team of 4 is nice in its consistency insofar as we've had consistency, but the goals for that project were to be double or triple that. The primary difference is that we, in Patagonia National Park outside the town of Prieto Moreno, we're looking to find a solid core of local folks who would come in, learn sustainable trail design and construction techniques, get paid a salary, not hourly, but a salary, roll into that job and do it until this land is given over to the country of Argentina, and then they would become immediately like the national park staff, and that was the goal. But quite honestly, the turmoil, the economic turmoil in Argentina has been going on for so long that there is such distrust of funding sources that there's just going to get pulled out. The rug's going to get pulled out, and people are basically, they're oftentimes bouncing from job to job to job to job to job without a lot of consistency decade after decade. And so finding that team who was willing to have the buy-in and trust that this will actually pay off, 5, 6, 10 years down the line has been a real challenge. And we've been finding a lot of people bouncing into the job and then bouncing out of the job, bouncing into the job, bouncing out of the job. So our job as trainers coming down to essentially work ourselves out of what we're trying to do hasn't been as successful as we wanted to be. We haven't found the team that's going to be there year after year after year locally. So that's put us in a position to have to be down there more often and change the way we're strategizing to be down there for this coming season. We'll touch on that a little bit later in the slide.
So Jed, it seems like you might have frozen.
But
up
we
again.
do what we give the teams
Okay.
tangible resources. Is just some field notes that on one of the jobs. So these are like very management practice and trails. And I'm about that. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry for the lag. Again, I'm tethering, and my the internet has not come back in Brunswick yet. My apologies.
Yeah.
I can still flip through, Dave, and you can just let me know, or shoot me a text if you want to talk over the slides.
Yeah, I think right when you started to cut out, you mentioned, so we've had some difficulty keeping a local team on. We've had keeping a consistent local team on, and I think it was cutting out right as you mentioned kind of the solutions that we've been trying to figure out to just keep the work moving on that project. One of them being a volunteer program that we're starting to implement this coming year, hopefully. That little piece of it got cut off, Jed. So, but keep going. We'll muddle through to the end.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. I'm just assuming that everybody on this particular call, Zoom, is okay with some technological glitches. Most of us are pretty analog here. So we've done what we can to offer the local crews like resources in terms of technical drawings, trail specifications, giving them maps, but also like actual little like guides that they can carry in their pocket and checklists of things that they can do to make sure that they're doing building correctly and remembering the right things to check for the terminology, the outslope, the back slope, the critical edge, and etc. Things that most of us who build trails are familiar with, but folks that have never built trails have never heard before. There's a steep learning curve. We've also spent a lot of time discussing, target demographics, carrying capacities, doing user impact studies, figuring out how many people will be coming to these places, which gets at one of the questions, and then ensuring that the resources are in place for the visitors. We put trail management objectives for every trail and campground, so that the trail crews know that everything's built to a specific or a specification, I should say, that's objective, and it's well thought out. So we're thinking about the users, and that dictates the width of the trails, the construction of the trails, and all of the associated amenities around the trails.
Yeah, I think that's, as a trainer, that's one of the biggest challenges down there, is to get the buy-in from the people that you're working with to ensure that they're going to keep building in the same way. And when we talk about sustainable trails, a lot of what we're talking about is grades that aren't so steep that water is going to run down and erode them. But then there's so many other considerations that Jed touched on a few, and getting that buy-in with the local crews so that they know that there's a reason behind every little detail that you're doing, is one of the biggest challenges for us. So that the trail doesn't all of a sudden, when you leave, get really narrow, or they don't suddenly diverge from the line that Jed chooses and decide to go straight uphill, because they're all strong young men and they like to go straight uphill. So that's kind of the challenge for the trainers down there, is to convince people.
Absolutely. And this photograph is very indicative of exactly what Deva was saying. This took, I think, 3 or 4 days of myself and Gabe Travis doing layout on to find a grade that goes from above where we are. And actually, I didn't draw that correctly. The trail goes down here, circles around there. We're trying to get to this point on the beach. And every time we went out there with the locals, they were just running down the slope, because that's what everybody does there. And to convince a whole bunch of super hardcore rock climbing mountaineers that we need to go at 6% for the next, 8 miles, as opposed to just running down and jumping in the water, has been a considerable challenge. In Perito Moreno National Park, there was the ability to build contour trails at a low grade, because it was a very, very big, wide open canvas. In the project in Patagonia National Park, it's a canyon, which is pretty much level at the top, close to level at the bottom, and super steep getting it down in and climbing back out. So we had to really choose when we were going with sustainable grades and when we were building very intensive structures, because as we all know, structure building is the only way to get up and down a steep slope sustainably. So sustainable trails construction doesn't mean always sustainable grades. It means sustainable intensive structure building. So there are a lot of steps,
as we all know,
in certain places, as we know.
If I can jump in there, Jed, just to give you the idea of kind of our process here. When with the US team, in both of these pictures, we built these in Patagonia Park. With the US team, we built, can you go back to the trails, Jed? Or the stairs, Jed?
Sure. I'll go to the next one. How about that?
Sure.
Does that work?
Well, I was talking about the stairs, but for example, the crew had to build 300 stairs to get from the bottom to the top of the canyon. With the US team, we built 30 of those stairs with the crew, and then we left and they finished them. And as well as this other picture, we built with them maybe the bottom 3, and then we let them finish. So the whole idea is to kind of do a small amount with them and then lay out the rest of the project so that they can keep it going. And by and large, we've been fairly impressed with their ability to do that. That picture is the top of that wooden staircase. So 300 stairs later.
Yep,
and then
well
if I can jump in on this picture again, we have, again, we talked about it, we have all these young guys who work with us, and a lot of young people who hike out there who just say, well, why don't you just go straight up and down? And one of the ways that we try to convince them is to watch the people who are hiking these trails. And for example, those switchbacks, you'll have an older person going down the switchbacks, and they use the switchback, or someone who, you know, is less in shape, not the young buck who's going to charge up or down. And those people will tell you, oh, I couldn't hike this trail before and now I can, which is really poignant and meaningful. Go ahead.
Well said. Yep, here's just a couple more. This is just kind of like the trail structure porn part of the presentation, where we're just like looking at cool things that got built. But I think it brings up a really good point. Like, we try not to build structures, but when we do build structures, we try to make them as sustainable and as well constructed as possible. We also need to do that in light of preserving the cultural, historic, and sensitive areas, of which there were many. But we'll let David touch on a couple of them.
Yeah. So like Jed said, in Patagonia Park, you find arrowheads all over the place. There were people in this canyon, lots of people using this canyon for, I believe, 13,000 years is how far back some of these cave paintings go. So this is a picture right here of the Cave of the Hands. It's the most iconic picture of this site, although there's thousands more cave paintings that stretch along an entire band of cliff. So when you visit, it's maybe an hour guided walk out and back to see all of it, and it's staggering. And you'll actually find hands elsewhere as well when you're just hiking in this canyon. So it's a very sensitive area, with just lots of artifacts and lots of paintings. And kind of the trick of designing and building in this area is figuring out how to bring people to beautiful places, but maybe avoiding other places that we really need people not to go to. Because of course, a person who passes an arrowhead, unless they have really good self-control or they've been well educated, they're probably going to want to take that arrowhead home, at which point it becomes meaningless artifact to science and history when it's detached from its place. So that's definitely one of the big, protecting the resources, one of the big challenges in Patagonia Park, and requires a lot of education. And again, that buy-in with the people you're working with and the people who are living there.
Absolutely. I know we're a little pressed for time. I'm going to talk about that in a second, but just to piggyback on what Dave is saying, I mean, a lot of what my job down there was to do is to figure out where these trails are going overall, the bigger picture of like where the trails are being constructed. And a big part of that is figure out where the trails do not go, not where the trails do go, but where they don't go. But just something that I would encourage everybody to think about as they're walking around or taking their next hike. Think about that concept of this picture right here being stuff that happened between 9 and 13,000 years ago, and how long ago that is, how well preserved that is. And really, it's a mind-boggling concept for a lot of us who are, live in a nation that's just a few centuries old, with the culture that we bring to it. All right, not saying like that what we generally think of as our culture, which is obviously not taking the indigenous peoples into account, but 9 to 13,000 years old, some of this stuff. So when we're going to put a scar on the landscape, which is essentially what a trail is, we need to do it with the utmost care and the utmost thought. With that in mind, we tried to avoid as many wetlands, they call them magines down there, sensitive areas where they were basically acting as natural filters, watersheds for the watersheds leading down into some of the waterways. Wherever we had those areas, we would try to elevate the tread with boardwalks, as we do here, not anything that's different than the way we try to construct trails around these parts. But there is a tendency for the social and inherited trails to go to like the coolest places in the park and just run straight up to them, just like it is in the whites. And so part of what we're doing is we're trying to pull those trails back from the most sensitive areas. Like this photo on the left, the trail where those folks are walking is not going to exist if, in 2 years, because that's going to get totally restored, and we're going to run this trail along the rim of this beautiful area, because people are basically get to where these folks, these hikers on the left are, and they run all over this beautiful, amazingly colored, mind-blowingly colored rock, and are destroying that resource. So we need to pull the trails away from that stuff a little bit. So we touched a little bit on what Rewilding Argentina is doing, and there's over 100 people employed by Rewilding Argentina in dozens of locations across Chile and Argentina. And this images of puma, which there's many around in the area, with a radio collar. They're tagging. They started with the big glorious beasts, and now they're working down towards the smaller birds and some of the flora as well. But tagging, getting geolocated data, trying to figure out patterns, and reintroducing both flora and fauna that has been displaced by humans and generally through the ranching industries, extractive industries, because there's a lot of mining that happens around here as well. And then beyond that, we're trying to extend the reach to social sustainability. So before we go too much farther, I just want to say we've got a couple more slides on sustainability. Then I'm going to transition. I just want to acknowledge it's 20 past 5 at this point. I'm hoping that we can wrap up this slideshow in the next 10 minutes or so, putting it about 5:30. I understand if people have to step out. I apologize. We started a little late and we have the technological glitches, but I'm hoping we wrap up in about 10 minutes or so if that works for folks, but I appreciate your perseverance. So both of these projects, the major projects we've worked on, have offered opportunity for national park staff to come and learn about what we're doing down there in terms of what we're building. Deva took this photo and I love it. You want to describe what's going on here, Deva?
Yeah, so this is, on the left is Erin Amadon. She's also a trail builder out of Maine. And she was down working with us. And then the two women on the right were workers at another Patagonia park. They call them portals, or little regions. So they were working in another park, and they got permission from their supervisor to come work with us for a week, with 2 other coworkers. So yeah, another really cool opportunity here is just cross-pollination with other work that's happening, other crews, people being curious about what we're doing, and we're curious about what they're doing, and that's a really cool aspect of this project. And they're moving a big rock,
absolutely is.
So that's what they're doing.
That's what's happening. The other project in Prieto Moreno National Park, the funding was contingent on sending an invitation to every national park in Argentina to send their staff, and the benefactor of the project would pay for their travel and their food while they were there. Send their staff to come out and work for a 21-day hitch in the field with the trail crew workers. And then so that they could actually not just come for a day or two, you had to come for 21 straight days and work in the field and build trails with the people that are out there building trails, so that they could then bring that knowledge back to their own national parks, start to host their own trainings within their national parks. And that has been pretty successful. We've got park rangers. There was a park ranger that came, a young park ranger that came to this project. Dave was working on last year. he's actually going to be coming back and bringing a number of his folks from Park Ranger School. So before they graduate and can get an actual a job in the National Park Service, they'll be coming and working for a number of weeks on the trail, learning these techniques. And then the US team that's down there, we try to pay special attention to these folks because we know they're coming there to learn as much as they can and then bring it back to a different region of Argentina and teach their peers. And I think that's, you know, extending the reach that way is super important. It's one of the most, it's one of the elements that feels the best about this project once we step away. The other element that feels really good that I have nothing to do with is the local school programs, and both organizations that are funding these two major projects are also funding local school programs, extensive local school programs to get kids out there, multi-day camping, backpacking trips, utilizing the trails that have been the newly constructed trails, and getting these people to visit these amazing, beautiful places that they live right next to and have probably never seen. Most of them have never seen it. And so it's that ripple effect that I think is going to really pay dividends, you know, with the generations to come. So, switching gears for a little bit for the sort of the wrap up is like, hey, what were the things that were super tough? How did we get through it? And then what were the final outcomes? All right. Sourcing tools and materials is really, really challenging in Argentina, but basically because there's no free trade. Borders are pretty locked down. We managed at one project to get a shipment of tools from the US, the type of trail tools that most crews, like the RMC crews, use all the time. It took 8 months and half the stuff was gone when we got there, when it finally arrived. Generally speaking, we're bringing that stuff down in duffel bags. So to the point where every time Deva or Benzo or Greg or Willie or myself or Aaron Amadon goes down, we're bringing 3, 4, 5 duffel bags with us of just stuff to leave down there. The project sites are super remote, as we've touched on. Had very ambitious outcome objectives, whether it's in terms of timeline or in terms of how comprehensive we want it to be socially. Coordination between project partners is always difficult, particularly if you think back to those first few slides of how many project partners there are involved in all these. The communication and coordination is always a challenge, even without a difficulty in translation. Different experience levels of crew members coming in, a rotating door of people coming in on the ground and trying to bring them up to speed. Establishing objective trail standards is a real challenge, particularly in an area that folks are not, the concept of sustainable trail design in and of itself is fairly foreign. So when you bring a bunch of foreigners talking about foreign concepts, it gets doubly challenging. So then matching those standards with production goals, because we're trying to get a whole bunch done as well at the same time, was Deva's probably daily headache down there. As well as trying to be sensitive to cultural considerations, which we've talked about a bit. Won't get into the nuances of the budgeting and the payments, but suffice to say, it's not straightforward. Dealing with everything, all of that, with a wind that will blow the freckles off your face, as Christine Tompkins once said after visiting Patagonia. She said, and it's true, the wind, and it's a very austere environment that is challenging just to stand up in, let alone work day in and day out and camp in. So it's beautiful, but rugged. Anything to add on those, Deva?
No, I'll let you keep going with the last couple slides. I think you covered it.
Okay, great. So I'm going to gloss through this stuff really quickly because it's not as important necessarily as talking questions and answers. But the goals for the upcoming season for Patagonia, for the Prieto Moreno National Park, is to maintain, have a maintenance team come in, clear trails and vegetation. That's going to be like just a few people, like, you know, probably 4 people for a month. They'll be coming from Bariloche. Refine the existing online reservation system so that anyone from the public can go in and reserve a hut, and it's there when you get there. Decommission more of those temporary domes, as we discussed. Continue to improve the marketing of the national park, because still there's very, very, very few people. And now we're talking, like, at this point, maybe like 300 or 400. It's been jumping, but not many people a year visit Prieto Moreno National Park. So put it on your list if you want to get there before people find out about it. Potentially open up another 20 kilometers of route finding trails in the more remote region, the northern part of the park. It's highly glaciated, and really getting up into some really, really, really beautiful and remote terrain with a lot of fording, rivers, you know, river crossings, that sort of stuff. For the adventurous of us. Continue the school programs, because that's what's going to pay dividends, as I said, down the line. So that's what's happening in Patagonia National Park. And Pinturas Canyon, we're still very much in the throes of building more trail. We haven't gotten the trail built yet. Patagonia National Park, the trail got busted out very quickly, and now it's a matter of maintaining those tourist canyons. So we need to construct another 20 kilometers of trail next year by hand. We need to improve wind breaks at the campgrounds and other areas of congregation for people to be able to get a little bit of shelter. Install 15 plus latrines. As of today, that number is at 17 and counting. Improve the parking areas, which are suboptimal at best at this point. Integrate our access to the UNESCO World Heritage Site while still limiting access to those sites. I probably didn't say that as eloquently as I could have, but we need to be able to monitor access so that it's not unfettered while still bringing people to this amazing area. Complete the staff housing. There's half dozen buildings that are almost finished and will house trail crews and current and future staff and US team, as well as bolstering amenities for concessionaires. We're trying to get people into the park who will be selling snacks and baked goods, water, juice, also providing educational opportunities. These little, there's 2 main concessionaires that have little, basically like outposts where you can go and buy stuff and learn stuff. And then the US volunteer program. I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about this. Deva can piggyback if you'd like. I apologize for not putting the information at the end of this slideshow like I meant to, but maybe we'll follow up with the link to the website where our newly minted volunteer program has started. And we've already gotten a couple applications from RMC affiliated folks, which I very much appreciate. We're trying to bring down about 12 to 15 folks from outside Argentina to come down and volunteer for, it's basically a 7-week commitment with 6 weeks of work to come work alongside the team from OBP and other folks, other trails professionals, Aaron Amadon, Willie Bittner, and the local Patagonians, and just go down there and build awesome trail. And it's going to be super fun. So we're going to have slots for starting in November, a slot starting in January, and a slot starting in March. So or the end of February. So if you're looking for more information, take a quick screenshot of this, check it out later. But the easiest way to find more information is to go to the website, which is volunteerpatagonia.org, pretty easy to remember. Volunteerpatagonia.org. They'll get all the information you need. If you want to pass the information on to somebody else you know might be interested, we're trying to get a good group of folks from the States down there, basically to push the progress on the trails and to have great cross-pollination, as Deva was saying, and also to show some of the local teams the variety of different folks that are coming from various parts of the world, but primarily the applicants so far have been from North America, how we build trail and to get it done really well and to be an inspiration to the folks who are down there and to learn from the folks that are down there. So that's my quick plug. Anything to add on that, Deva?
No, I think it's going to be fun.
All right. There's a robust global marketing campaign that's happening. We have nothing to do with it. It's all from the benefactors, the people that are funding this project or bringing influencers and all kinds of other stuff that I don't know about. So that's that. And then, as I mentioned before, we're launching a program for the Park Ranger School students next year. And we've got, I think, 4 people enrolled already from the Park Ranger School who will be coming down and augmenting our efforts down there and bringing it back to their students at the Park Ranger schools. And I think that's really great because it's not just the school programs are amazing, but it's also bringing it back to the people that are going to be employed in various national parks around Argentina. Also going to continue the rewilding efforts. The rewilding team has about the same amount or a little bit more resources than the trails team. So, you know, for every dollar is being spent on trails, there's at least that much being spent on rewilding. It's just not really part of our purview, so it's not something we focused on in this particular presentation. But they're doing some really, really wonderful work down there. And then continue those youth outdoor programs. You know, the folks who are going into spending nights in the canyons, they're being supplied with all the gear that they need if they don't have it. Their parents are being asked to be chaperones. There's also, we're trying to work out some situations where once you've gone through the program that your families can get in and have sort of special accommodations to try to promote students going back to their home, telling their family about it, and then visiting the park with their family. We're trying to push those initiatives as well. So all good stuff happening on those efforts. And that's about that. Really appreciate your time. Sorry I went over, you know, about an hour and a half. So I don't know if we have time for
I think a lot of people have kind of trickled out, but if there's anyone still on who would like to pose a question, now's the time.
Well, no question, but I wanted to thank Jed for doing this. Well, Jed and Deva both. It's pretty fascinating and certainly a worthwhile venture.
Thanks, Tad. Thanks for glad you could make it the whole time.
Yeah, thank y'all for putting this together.
Yeah, and we lost Jenny, but she's been pushing along the effort too, so shout out to her. Well, if there's no other questions, Jed, you want the final word?
I'd say take it away, Deva.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. And like I said, if anyone has an interesting topic or an interesting person to suggest, we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch through RMC Alumni Group, which is the organization that put this on. Get in touch with Jenny. Yeah, so thanks for joining us, and have a great afternoon and evening, everybody.
Thanks. See ya.
Hey.
Hey.